I didn't yell when my 24-year-old son demanded 100 grand. I didn't even blink when my wife of 30 years told me to just write the check. I just put down my fork, walked out the front door, and let the police explain the concept of consequences. The dining room table was solid oak. I bought it 20 years ago from a guy who built it by hand in his garage. It weighed 300 pounds and had survived spilled milk, middle school science projects, and a decade of Thanksgiving dinners. I always liked that table. It felt real. The people sitting across from me tonight, however, felt like strangers wearing familiar masks. Dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Connor had finally graduated college. It took him 6 years and 3 changes in major, but he had a piece of paper that said he was educated. I'd paid the tuition in full. No loans, no debt. I worked 60-hour weeks at the logistics firm I helped build from the ground up just so he wouldn't have to start his life in a hole. He sat across from me now, swirling a glass of Cabernet I'd pulled from the cellar. He was wearing a $400 designer hoodie that looked like it had been dragged behind a lawnmower, a birthday gift from his mother. "So, Dad," Connor said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the oak. "I wanted to talk to you about the future. My future." I cut a piece of roast beef. "All right, let's talk. You sent out those resumes? Dave down at the shipping yard said he'd take you on as a junior manager. It's solid pay, good benefits." Connor let out a short, nasal laugh. He glanced at his mother, Sarah, who sat at the head of the table. She offered him a tight, encouraging smile. It was the same smile she used to give him when he struck out in Little League. "It's not your fault, honey. The pitcher was throwing too fast." "Dad, come on," Connor said, shaking his head. "I'm not working at a shipping yard. I'm not wearing a high-vis vest and checking manifests. I have a degree in communications. I'm an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur needs a business," I pointed out, keeping my voice level, and capital, and a product. "My product is my brand." He tapped his chest. "I'm starting a luxury lifestyle concierge service, connecting high-net-worth individuals with exclusive experiences, sourcing rare watches, booking private jets, club access." I stopped chewing. I looked at him, really looked at him. His hands were soft. He had never changed a tire. Last month, he called roadside assistance because he ran out of windshield wiper fluid. "Connor, you don't know any high-net-worth individuals," I said, "except me. And I don't need a rare watch. I have a Casio." Sarah sighed heavily, her fork clinking sharply against her porcelain plate. "Tom, please, don't do that. Don't belittle his vision just because you don't understand how the modern world works." "I understand how math works, Sarah," I replied, shifting my gaze to her. "How is he going to make money?" "By networking," Connor jumped in, his voice tightening with that familiar defensive edge. "By projecting success. You have to look the part to get in the room, Dad. It's all optics." Which brings me to my pitch. Pitch. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. He wasn't talking to his father. He was talking to an investor. Or, more accurately, an ATM. "I need seed money," Connor said, sitting back and crossing his arms. "I've run the numbers. To get the LLC set up, secure a decent co-working space downtown, and handle the initial marketing push, I need 100 grand. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I looked at him. I waited for the punchline. I waited for him to crack a smile. He didn't. He stared back at me with absolute, unblinking entitlement. $100,000, I repeated. "It's an investment," Connor said quickly. "And a big chunk of that is for the vehicle. I can't roll up to valet at a 5-star hotel in my Honda Civic. It ruins the brand. I found a used G-Wagon. It's a steal. Black on black. It projects authority. A G-Wagon. It's a business expense, Tom," Sarah chimed in, her tone artificially bright. "It's a write-off. You know about those." I set my fork down. The metal clinked against the plate. It sounded loud in the quiet room. I looked for my son, who wanted a 6-figure luxury SUV to fake a life he hadn't earned, to my wife, who thought this was a perfectly reasonable request. No, I said. Connor's jaw hardened. No, no. I'm not giving you $100,000 so you can pretend to be rich on Instagram. You want a G-Wagon? Get a job. Save up. Buy one. Dad, you're not listening. I heard every word. I interrupted. You want me to fund a fantasy? The answer is no. Call Dave. Take the management job. Connor slammed his hand on the oak table. The wine glasses shook. I'm not working at a dock. I am better than that. You have the money, Dad. It's just sitting there in your stupid brokerage accounts. You drive a 10-year-old truck and you wear clothes from Costco. What is the point of having it if you're not going to help your own family? He was breathing hard. His face was flushed. I looked at him, feeling a sudden, hollow ache in my chest. He didn't see the decades of sweat. He didn't see the missed vacations, the sleepless nights staring at spreadsheets, the sheer grinding terror of nearly going bankrupt in 2008. He just saw a pile of cash, and he was angry I wasn't shoveling it into his lap. Tom, Sarah's voice wasn't bright anymore. It was cold. It was the voice she used when I had embarrassed her in front of company. He's your son, she said, enunciating every syllable. He is asking for your support, for a tiny fraction of what you're worth. Are you really going to be this petty? I turned to her, my wife, the woman I had shared a bed with for 3 decades. Petty? Sarah, it's $100,000. I gave him a paid-off car. I gave him a debt-free degree. I've given him everything I never had. At what point does he earn his own life? Times are different now, Sarah snapped, her voice rising. You can't just walk into a factory and work your way up to CEO anymore. He needs a head start. If you don't give him this, you're setting him up to fail. If I give him this, I'm guaranteeing he fails. Bullshit, Connor barked. You're just cheap. You've always been cheap. You resent me because I don't want to break my back for pennies like you did. You're jealous that I actually want to live. I felt the blood roaring in my ears, but outwardly, I was perfectly still. I looked at this boy, my blood, my name. He was 24. He had never paid an electric bill. He didn't know how much a gallon of milk cost, and he was calling me cheap because I wouldn't buy him a Mercedes. I looked back at Sarah. You agree with him. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. Yes, she said, crossing her arms. Her eyes were hard, defiant. I do. You've hoarded your wealth for years, Tom. For what? Retirement. You're going to drop dead of a heart attack at your desk anyway. Write the check. Don't make me the bad guy here. Just write the check and let him start his life. And if I don't, I asked quietly. Sarah scoffed. Then what are you even good for, Tom? Seriously, if you aren't going to provide for your family, what is your purpose in this house? There it was, the quiet, ugly truth, finally dragged out into the harsh dining room light. It hung in the air between us, heavy and foul. What are you even good for? I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a father. I was a utility. I was the water heater in the basement, ignored entirely until I stopped producing, and then cursed for the inconvenience. They didn't love me. They loved what I subsidized. I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger just evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sweeping clarity. It was like waking up from a 30-year fever dream. I looked at Sarah. I looked at Connor. I didn't see my family. I saw 2 parasites waiting for the host to bleed. I pushed my chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I stood up. I didn't throw my napkin down. I folded it, deliberately, and placed it next to my plate. Okay, I said. Connor blinked, his anger momentarily faltering. Okay, you'll transfer the money? No, I said. Okay, I understand. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I didn't rush. I walked at a steady, measured pace. I heard the scrape of Sarah's chair behind me. Tom, where are you going? I didn't answer. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the master bedroom. I pulled my old leather duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. I unzipped it. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I grabbed jeans, t-shirts, underwear, socks. I threw them in. I wasn't packing for a weekend. I was packing for a long time. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Her arms were still crossed, but the arrogant certainty in her face was beginning to crack, replaced by a flickering annoyance. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Are you throwing a tantrum? You're a 55-year-old man, Tom. Stop being dramatic." I walked into the bathroom, grabbed my toothbrush, my razor, and my heart medication. I tossed them into the side pocket of the bag. "I'm not being dramatic, Sarah," I said, zipping the bag closed. I grabbed my passport from the safe. "I'm answering your question." "What question?" "You asked what I'm good for if I don't write the checks." I picked up the duffel bag and looked her dead in the eye. "The answer is nothing." "So, I'm removing myself from the equation." Her face went pale, but she quickly covered it with a sneer. "Oh, please. You're going to leave? Because of a fight over a car? Where are you going to go? You don't have any friends outside of work. You'll be back by tomorrow night, begging for a hot meal." I walked past her. She had to step back into the hallway to avoid getting hit by the bag. "Tom," she yelled as I headed down the stairs. Connor was standing at the bottom, looking confused. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" he asked, stepping back as I reached the landing. "I'm leaving, Connor," I said. I pulled my keys out of my pocket. "You want to be a man? You want to be an entrepreneur? Congratulations. You're the man of the house now. The mortgage is due on the 1st. The property tax is due in November. Good luck with the brand." I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air hit my face. It felt incredible. "You walk out that door, we are done," Sarah screamed from the stairs. "I will take half of everything you have. I'll take the business." I paused on the threshold. I didn't look back. "Call your lawyer," I said to the empty driveway. "I'll be calling mine." I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me. It clicked with a solid, satisfying finality. I walked to my 10-year-old truck, tossed the bag in the passenger seat, turned the key, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The rain started 20 minutes later, a steady, drumming downpour that smeared the streetlights into blurry streaks of yellow and red. I drove without a destination for an hour, just letting the rhythmic thumping of the wipers clear my head. I felt a strange sense of euphoria mixed with profound grief. 30 years, evaporated in a single conversation. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a single conversation. It was a slow rot, 1,000 little compromises, a million small demands. The G-Wagon was just the bullet that finally put the marriage out of its misery. I pulled into the glowing, neon-lit parking lot of a 2-4-hour diner on the edge of town. I needed a coffee. I needed to sit in a booth that didn't belong to me and figure out where I was going to sleep tonight. I walked in. The place smelled like old grease and bleached floors. I slid into a vinyl booth in the back and ordered a black coffee from a waitress who looked more exhausted than I felt. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Sarah. 7 text messages. "You're pathetic. Come back here right now and let's talk like adults. You are ruining your son's life. Don't think you can just abandon us." I swiped them away. I didn't block her number yet. My lawyer would need the documentation of her state of mind. I took a sip of the coffee. It was burnt, bitter, and exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't a text message. It was a push notification from the First National Bank app. I frowned, setting my mug down. I tapped the screen and unlocked the phone. Alert. Wire transfer initiated. Amount, $100,000 USD. Destination, Connor James Holding LLC. Status, pending dual authorization. My blood ran cold. The joint checking account. Sarah had access to it. It was the account we used for the mortgage, the bills, the household expenses. But I kept the bulk of my liquid cash there, about 150 grand, because I liked having a safety net I could touch immediately if the business needed a sudden cash injection. She was trying to take the money. While I was driving in the rain, she had marched over to her laptop and tried to wire the exact amount Connor demanded into his newly formed, worthless shell company. But 100 grand isn't a pair of shoes. A bank doesn't just let that kind of money move digitally without a secondary check. For transfers over 50,000, our account required dual authorization. A code was sent to her phone, and a code was sent to my phone. Both had to be entered on the website to clear the funds. My phone buzzed again. An SMS message. Your first national authorization code is 84921. Do not share this code with anyone. I stared at the 6 digits. A grim, humorless smile crept onto my face. They were trapped. They couldn't get the money without this code. Then, the second notification popped up on my screen. Alert. Wire transfer approved. Status. Processing. The diner around me seemed to stop. The clinking of dishes behind the counter faded out. Approved. Hell, I hadn't entered the code. I hadn't even opened the banking app. My mind raced. How did she bypass the two-factor authentication? Then it hit me. A memory from 3 years ago. When I upgraded my phone, I had left my old iPad plugged into a charger in the home office. It was synced to my Apple ID. It received my text messages. She hadn't bypassed it. She had walked into my office, woken up my iPad, read my authentication code, and typed it into her laptop. She didn't just try to take the money. She impersonated me to authorize it. That wasn't a marital dispute anymore. That was wire fraud. I sat there in the cracked vinyl booth, looking at the glowing screen. The money was processing. It would hit Connor's account by 9 a.m. tomorrow. They probably thought they had won. They probably thought I would just yell about it, maybe call my lawyer in the morning, but ultimately let it go because he's my son. That was the pattern, wasn't it? They pushed. I complained. And then I paid. Not tonight. I tapped the banking app. I found the fraud department's 2 4-hour hotline. I dialed the number and held the phone to my ear. First National Fraud Prevention. This is Marcus. How can I help you? My name is Thomas Hayes, I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I need to report an unauthorized wire transfer on my account. Account ending in 4,409. Okay, Mr. Hayes, let me pull that up. I see a transfer initiated 10 minutes ago for $100,000. Is this the transaction you're referring to? Yes, sir. Our system shows that the dual authorization protocol was completed successfully. Both SMS codes were entered. I didn't enter the code, I said. My wife accessed a secondary device of mine without my permission, read the code, and authorized the transfer to an account owned by my son. I did not consent to this. I want the transfer frozen immediately. There was a pause on the line. The customer service rep's tone shifted from polite to serious. Mr. Hayes, because this involves a joint account holder, freezing a verified transfer requires us to flag the transaction as a malicious internal fraud. We will have to lock down the entire account. Neither you nor your wife will have access to these funds while the investigation is pending. Lock it down, I said instantly. I also need to inform you, sir, that because of the dollar amount exceeding $10,000 and the circumvention of digital security protocols using a secondary device, federal banking regulations require us to automatically file a suspicious activity report, SAR. I understand. Furthermore, First National will immediately dispatch local law enforcement to the IP address where the secondary authorization was executed to secure the device and verify the unauthorized access. Sir, if we proceed, the police will be sent to your home tonight. The waitress walked by with a pot of coffee. She raised her eyebrows in a silent offer to top me off. I nodded. She poured the black liquid, the steam rising between me and the window. I thought about Sarah's sneer. What are you even good for? I thought about Connor slamming his hand on the table. You're just cheap. They thought I was just a wallet. They forgot that the wallet was attached to a man who built his life on rules, hard work, and accountability, a man who was finally done paying the ransom. Mr. Hayes, the rep asked, are you still there? Do you want me to proceed with the fraud freeze and the law enforcement dispatch? I took a sip of the fresh coffee. It burned my tongue, and it tasted like freedom. Yes, Marcus, I said. Proceed. I hung up the phone. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. Connor wasn't getting his G-Wagon, and Sarah was about to learn that playing games with a man's livelihood had a very steep price of admission. I looked at my watch. It was 9:15 p.m. The police dispatch usually took about 2 hours for non-violent financial complaints. I leaned back in the booth, ordered a slice of cherry pie, and waited for my phone to ring. The cherry pie was stale, the crust tasting faintly of the cardboard box it had probably been frozen in. I ate it anyway. I chased it with a third cup of black coffee. The diner had emptied out. It was just me, a trucker snoring softly in a booth near the bathrooms, and the waitress reading a paperback behind the register. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady, miserable drizzle. Cars hissed by on the wet pavement, their headlights cutting through the dark. I watched the clock above the kitchen doors. 10:30 p.m., 11 p.m., 11:15 p.m. I didn't feel anxious. I felt a heavy, numb calm. It was the kind of calm that settles over you when you've already survived the worst part of the crash and you're just waiting for the paramedics to pry the doors open. The marriage was dead. The illusion of my son was dead. All that was left was the paperwork. At 11:42 p.m., my phone lit up on the Formica table. It vibrated violently, spinning slightly on the slick surface. The caller ID glowed bright in the dim diner light. Sarah, mobile. I let it ring 3 times. Then, I picked it up and swiped to answer. I didn't say hello. I just held the receiver to my ear. Dom. Her voice wasn't cold anymore. It was shrill. It cracked on the single syllable of my name. Underneath her voice, I heard the heavy, static squawk of a police radio. I'm here, I said. Tom, what the hell did you do? She practically shrieked. The panic was raw, bleeding through the phone. There are 2 police cruisers in our driveway. There are officers in the foyer. They're asking for my laptop. They're asking for your iPad. Tom, tell them to leave. I took a slow breath. I looked out the window at the rain. I can't do that, Sarah. They aren't there for a noise complaint. They said you reported a fraudulent wire transfer, she yelled. I could hear Connor in the background, his voice a frantic, high-pitched whine. Mom, don't let them take my phone. Mom, my whole network is on there. I did report it, I said, keeping my voice entirely level, because it was fraudulent. I didn't authorize a $100,000 transfer. Sarah, you did. It's a joint account, she screamed. I have access to it. I am your wife. You have access to the account, I corrected her. You don't have access to my identity. You read a secure 2-factor authentication code sent to a device you do not own, and you input it to bypass federal banking security. That isn't a marital dispute, Sarah. That's a felony. The line went dead quiet for 3 seconds. The silence was heavier than the screaming. When she finally spoke, the arrogant sneer was entirely gone. She sounded small. She sounded terrified. Tom, please, you're scaring me. Stop this. Just call them right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we had a disagreement and you overreacted. I didn't overreact. I protected my assets from theft. Theft? It's for your son. It's for a car, Sarah. A toy. You committed wire fraud for a luxury SUV. I rubbed my eyes. The exhaustion was finally starting to seep into my bones. You asked what I was good for if I didn't just write the checks. You thought I was a pushover. You thought you could just take what you wanted, and I'd eventually back down, because I always back down to keep the peace. Not this time. Sir, excuse me, ma'am. I need you to hand me the phone. It was a new voice, deep, authoritative, not Sarah's. There was a muffled scuffle, a sharp gasp from Sarah, and then the heavy sound of a hand over the receiver. Mr. Hayes? The voice asked. Speaking, I said. This is Officer Davis with the local precinct. We were dispatched by First National Bank's Fraud Division regarding an unauthorized transfer originating from this IP address. I have a Mrs. Sarah Hayes and a Mr. Connor Hayes here. Mrs. Hayes claims this is a domestic misunderstanding and that you gave verbal consent for her to use your authentication code. Can you confirm that? I pictured my living room. I pictured the plush white rugs Sarah insisted on buying, the framed photos on the mantle of vacations I barely got to enjoy. I pictured Connor, standing there in his $400 ripped hoodie, watching the consequences of his entitlement finally manifest in the form of a badge and a gun. Officer Davis, I said clearly, I did not give verbal consent. I did not give written consent. I specifically denied the request for the funds during a conversation at dinner. I then left the residence. While I was gone, my wife accessed my secondary device without permission, intercepted a secure code, and authorized the transfer. Officer Davis let out a slow, professional breath. Understood, Mr. Hayes. Given the dollar amount, the bank has initiated a hard freeze on the account and filed a suspicious activity report. Because the digital authorization was bypassed internally, this crosses into cyber fraud territory. We will be seizing the laptop, the iPad, and any mobile devices connected to the home's Wi-Fi network that may have been used in the transaction for forensic extraction. In the background, Connor lost his mind. You can't take my phone. I have client contacts on there. I'm starting a business. Dad, tell them to stop. I didn't say anything. Mr. Hayes, Officer Davis continued, ignoring the shouting. We will be transporting Mrs. Hayes to the station for formal questioning regarding the unauthorized access. You will need to come down tomorrow morning to file your official statement. Do you have a safe place to stay tonight? I do, officer. Thank you. We'll be in touch. The line clicked. The call ended. I set the phone down on the table. The waitress was staring at me from behind the register. I don't know what my face looked like, but it must have been grim. I left a $20 bill on the table to cover the pie and the coffee, gave her a brief nod, and walked out into the rain. I slept in my truck that night, in the back of a Walmart parking lot. I leaned the seat back, pulled a spare jacket over my chest, and listened to the rain hammer the roof. It was uncomfortable. It was cold. My back ached. It was the best sleep I'd had in a decade. The fallout was absolute. I met with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Mitchell, at 8 o'clock the next morning. I walked into his office wearing the same clothes I'd slept in, drank a cup of his expensive Keurig coffee, and laid out exactly what happened. Mitchell didn't blink. He just started writing. By noon, the divorce papers were drafted. By 2 p.m., I had signed a lease on a furnished, one-bedroom apartment across town. It was small. The couch smelled faintly of cheap cleaning supplies. The TV was a decade old. I loved it instantly. The legal reality for Sarah and Connor hit them like a freight train. Because the bank flagged the transfer as malicious internal fraud, the joint account was frozen indefinitely. Federal investigators don't care if you've been married for 30 years. When $100,000 moves illegally across state lines, Connor had incorporated his bogus LLC in Delaware for tax purposes. It triggers alarms that take a small army of lawyers to silence. Sarah spent 12 hours in police custody before her sister bailed her out. They didn't charge her with federal wire fraud. The prosecutor eventually downgraded it to a state-level unauthorized computer access charge, recognizing it as a messy domestic dispute rather than a criminal syndicate. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. She had a criminal record. She had probationary terms, and she had no access to the cash. 3 days after I walked out, my phone rang. It was Connor. I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately. I answered on the second ring. Dad, he said. His voice wasn't arrogant anymore. It was thin, reedy, and laced with panic. Dad, my debit card declined at the grocery store. The joint credit card is shut off. I tried to buy gas and it got rejected. What is going on? I sat down in the cheap leather chair in my new apartment. I looked out the small window. The sun was shining. The accounts are frozen, Connor, pending the fraud investigation. But I need money. Mom's lawyers took her last personal checking balance for the retainer. We don't have anything. The Wi-Fi just got shut off because the autopay bounced. I guess the luxury concierge service will have to wait, I said. Dad, this isn't funny, he shouted, the old entitlement flaring up for a brief second before dying back down into desperation. We need groceries. I need gas. You have to unfreeze the accounts. I can't. It's out of my hands. It's federal now. Then send me cash. Venmo me. Something. I'm your son. I leaned back in the chair. The leather creaked. You told me I was just cheap. You told me you resented me for working hard. You wanted to be an entrepreneur, Connor. Entrepreneurs solve problems. They secure capital. They hustle. Dad, please. I talked to Dave down at the shipping yard this morning. I interrupted. He said the junior manager position is filled, but they need a forklift operator on the night shift. $18 an hour, time and a half on weekends. You start from the bottom, but the checks clear every Friday. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the gears turning in his head, the horrifying realization that the safety net was gone. There was no G-Wagon. There was no seed money. There was only the brutal, unforgiving reality of the real world. A forklift, he whispered. A forklift. You'll need steel-toed boots. You can probably find a cheap pair at a thrift store. I can't do that. I have a degree. You have a piece of paper I paid for, I corrected him. You have no skills, no experience, and no money. You are 24 years old. It's time to find out what you're actually made of. The shift starts at 10 p.m. Don't be late. I hung up the phone. I didn't block his number, but I knew he wouldn't call back. Not today. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. It was ugly, expensive, and exhausting. Sarah tried to fight for half the business, but her unauthorized computer access conviction gave Mitchell the leverage he needed to negotiate a clean break. She got the house, but she also got the mortgage that came with it. Without my income, she was forced to sell it within 3 months. She downsized to a condo in the suburbs. I never saw the G-Wagon. I did, however, drive past the shipping yard one night, a few months later on my way home from a late dinner. I parked across the street and watched the heavy machinery moving shipping containers under the harsh, glaring floodlights. I saw a young man in a high-vis vest, standing near the loading dock. He was holding a clipboard. His shoulders were slumped. He looked exhausted. He looked defeated. It was Connor. I watched him for a few minutes. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I didn't smile. I just felt a quiet, profound sadness. I had spent 24 years trying to protect him from the struggle, from the dirt, from the exhaustion of building a life. I thought I was being a good father. Instead, I had built a prison of comfort, and I had raised a boy who didn't know how to survive outside its walls. Now, he was learning the hard way, the only way left. I put the truck in drive and pulled away from the curb. I went back to my small apartment. I made a pot of cheap coffee. I sat in my leather chair and listened to the silence. It wasn't the silence of a dead marriage. It wasn't the silence of a house filled with resentment. It was just quiet. I looked at my calloused hands. I thought about the logistics firm I built. I thought about the bank account that was finally under my sole control again. I had lost 30 years to a woman who saw me as an ATM and a son who saw me as an obstacle. But I was 55. I had time. I had my health. I had my peace. And for the first time in my life, nobody was asking me for a damn thing. Family isn't a blank check, and respect isn't something you can buy. When you become nothing more than a utility in your own home, walking away isn't just an option, it's survival. If you resonated with this story, drop a like to show your support. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel for more grounded, real-life stories.